Alright, so they want us to make a truth table um, for this statement down here. Well, the statement has two simple statements, P and Q. Whenever we make a truth table with P and Q, it'll always start off with the same two columns. We'll have a P column and a Q column. And to cover all the scenarios, P will always be true, true, false, false, and Q will be true, false, true, false. Oftentimes in my math lab, they'll fill those two columns in for us, but there's some times where we have to make the truth table from scratch, and so it's important to know what to put for those two columns, and again, it'll always be the same. When making a truth table, the heading of the final column, on the far right, will always be the goal. It'll always be this statement down here. And then the headings of the intermediate columns is going to be the stuff that we need to reach that goal. And a lot of times in my math lab, they'll fill those columns in for us, and all we have to do is put the T's and F's in, which is the case for this problem. But sometimes we have to be able to identify what to put on those headings ourselves. And so if you look at the ultimate goal, notice there's a not Q in the problem, so that means we need a not Q column. And then notice that there is a not Q and P within the goal, and so that's why we need a not Q and P column. And then finally there's a P and Q, and so that's why we have a P and Q column. And so now I got to fill in these columns with trues and falses. Now the first column is not Q. Not Q is just going to be the opposite of Q, so that's going to be false, true, false, true. The next column is not Q and P, so to fill that column in, I should be focusing on the not Q column and the P column. And is true when both of the statements are true. So in order for not Q and P to be true, P has to be true and not Q has to be true, which is not the case for the first row because not Q is false. On the next row, P is true and not Q is true, so not Q and P would be true. On the next row, they're actually both false, and so this would be false. And on the last row, P is false and not Q is true, but since they're both not true, this would be false. Now we have P and Q, so on the first row, P and Q are both true, so this will be true. On the next three rows, it'll be false, because on the next three rows, they're not both true. On the second row, P is true and Q is false. On the third, P is false and Q is true, so they're not both true, so we have a false. And on the last row, both P and Q are false. Now we can fill in the last column, the answer. And so on the last column, we want not Q and P or P and Q. And so I should be looking at the not Q and P column, which is this one, the one that I'm identifying in blue. And then the P and Q column is this one. And so we're looking at these two columns, and those two columns are connected with this symbol. That's an OR symbol. And OR is true. OR will be true as long as one of them are true, either one. And so as long as one of them is true, we'll put it true. And so on the first row, not Q and P is false, but P and Q is true, so one of them is true, so this will be true. On the next row, one of them is true. On the next row, actually on the third and fourth rows, they're both false. So in order for OR to be true, we need at least one true. And so I now have a complete truth table for the given statement.